and a longtime member. We have another wonderful speaker today, Daniel Erspamer, Chief Executive Officer of the Pelican Institute. We're glad to have you, and he's a nationally recognized free market leader. Daniel has spent his career building and growing effective policy organizations around the country. Since being appointed to Pelican Institute CEO in 2017, he has built a team and strategy to address Louisiana's most substantial policy challenges and to create a Louisiana where everyone has the opportunity to flourish. Under Daniel's leadership, the Institute has generated policy victories in the areas of education reform, criminal justice reform, state spending, innovation policy, and a number of more. Daniel and his wife, Emily, are both graduates of Tulane, and his wife's a graduate of the law school there. And they live in New Orleans, have 4 children, 2 dogs, 2 birds, 2 guinea pigs, and tropical fish. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. Well, brave, hardy souls have made it out for Lundi Gras. Thank you for being here, and thank you so much for having me today. I will confess I rode on Toth yesterday, for those of you who've maybe been in New Orleans, so my voice is maybe a little scratchy, but we'll get through this. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity. Today, what I'd like to do is share the Pelican Institute's priorities for the upcoming legislative session, have some discussion around big picture, what we hope to accomplish in the next few years, and then, of course, take any questions and discussion that you may have. So, again, to begin with, as John mentioned in his kind introduction, the Pelican Institute is Louisiana's free market think tank. So our job is to research, study, follow the data, and make recommendations to the legislature, to the governor, to citizens of Louisiana about what policies best advance individual flourishing. So if you read our mission, it's that every person in Louisiana should have the opportunity to flourish, that we remove barriers to opportunity, that we create pathways to work and opportunity, so that Louisiana is a place that you can live, work, raise a family, start a business, follow really at its heart the American dream. And that is where we stand today, opposite of that in many ways. Louisiana, as you may know, is the 3rd highest outmigration state in the country. We're losing our kids and grandkids at a rapid pace, and that's something that we believe very strongly needs to be reversed. And the good news is it can be reversed. We're not a landlocked state in the middle of nowhere with no natural resources or no way to dig ourselves out of this. Our contention is we've gotten here because of roughly 100 years of largely bad policy decisions, which means it may not happen overnight, but by making good policy decisions, we can turn the tide around. Look at our assets. 5 of the top 15 ports in the country, some of the most active natural gas sector of any place in the country, some of the most oil refineries of any place in the country, ready and inexpensive access to land and water and energy, not to mention the mouth of the Mississippi River right here in our state. There's just no reason with these assets that any state, frankly any country would love to have, that we shouldn't be at the top of the list for opportunity and prosperity. And so we've got to really take a focused look at, we believe, transformational change over the next several years to address those challenges and to create, again, a policy environment that allows everyone to flourish. So today I want to focus on just a few of our very most important priorities. Of course, we have been and will continue to be working actively with lawmakers, with the governor's team, and with leaders all across the state. Over the last year, you may have seen our campaign. We called it Our Louisiana Comeback. It was a statewide campaign. We visited 52 parishes and gave speeches in all of those parishes. If anyone knows a civic group in Tensaw Parish who's looking for a speaker, please let me know. We've got a few more to get to. But all across the state, barnstorming as well as a digital campaign, radio, all across the board to really set the stage for what we believe we have the opportunity now. And our message was, it's time to write Louisiana's comeback story. It's time to make bold transformational changes that allow us to do that. And we have our first opportunity here this year. And at the top of that list, the top priority for the Pelican Institute this year will be education freedom and the opportunity to advance universal education scholarship accounts for every child so that state dollars follow the child to the school of their choice. We believe fundamentally education is critical to opportunity and prosperity. And the way we must deliver that is to allow every child in Louisiana access to a school that best fits him or her. Now, I have 4 kids at home, 4 kids who grew up under the same house with the same parents. And, you know, the striking thing as we lived through the lockdowns and were very responsible for the first time, at least as older kids, for their education. Of course, we always have a responsibility for their education. But when we were just there to deliver it, like most parents and grandparents across the country, what was so striking is how differently they all learn. I had one that was up at 7 o'clock every morning. He would plow through his schoolwork, and then it took him about 2 hours, and he played basketball outside the rest of the day. I had another that I had to drag kicking and screaming just to do her worksheets and get through the day. And I'm absolutely convinced after living through that when you are required to help a kindergartner sit through a Zoom class, that is the very reason that God gave us bourbon. So we made it through that well. But ESAs are a policy we have seen proven across the country. A number of states, 10 or 11, I believe now, have made advancements to enact universal education scholarship accounts. And this is really the disruption in the system that's necessary. I'll give one final example on this. I always share this with crowds when we speak. The very first compulsory public education law in America, the law, the structure on which basically our entire traditional public education system has been built, was passed in the 1600s, and its stated purpose in Massachusetts, the stated purpose was to prevent young women from becoming witches. And you can understand that in the context of the time, but I would argue certainly our education system has much greater needs and demands than just that right now, and maybe we could debate how well it's even doing that, but that's a conversation for a different time. It's time for an opportunity for every child to have that access, every child to follow those pathways, and every child to allow those dollars to follow them to that opportunity. I believe this will be a major priority of both the governor and the legislature as we gavel into our regular session in March, and certainly it's the thing that we are most passionate about as we head into that. Now, the second thing we talked about in our Louisiana Comeback campaign as one of the 2 critical areas, we talked about universal education freedom, and we talked about phasing out the personal income tax and really getting into some significant and structural tax reform here in Louisiana. Now, of course, that doesn't happen until the fiscal session in 2025, but that doesn't mean the work doesn't start. The only way we are going to tackle our tax challenges is by first tackling our budget challenges. We have spent and spent and spent. The state budget over the last 10 years has grown 88%. Now, I don't know about you, my household budget has not grown 88%, and I suspect most business, small business, entrepreneurs and household budgets haven't either. And yet, we have continued to spend money at a rate that's absolutely unsustainable. Now, it's true, there's some good things that have happened on this too. The paying down of debt last year that the legislature did, and I see we have Representative Freiberg here, I know worked very hard on this. That has already produced results. If you look at the projections today, paying down that retirement debt is saving us nearly $100 million in the current fiscal year projection. Imagine the impact of the long-term budget by even putting more resources toward paying down that debt early. But the truth is we can't continue to spend at the rate we've been spending. If we ever have hope of eliminating the income tax, of being competitive, that requires fiscal restraint. And that means a stronger expenditure limit and better policies in the state budget. Now, an expenditure limit that works would look something like this. We believe that government spending should grow at a rate of inflation and population. So if the population is growing, of course, it makes sense. There's more services to be provided and, ideally anyway, more taxpayers picking up the bill. And so it would make sense to grow government in that way. Inflation, of course, is a part of our society. We felt it very hard in the last couple of years. But before that, pre-COVID, as you recall, inflation was relatively flat, at least compared to historical levels. So we lived in a period over the last decade with relatively flat inflation and, unfortunately, outmigration. Our population has actually dropped in that period of time. And yet, the state budget grew by 88%. If only we had constrained the growth of government in some formula like that grew at the rate of inflation and population, we could have been over halfway through phasing out our personal income tax. The income tax brings in about $4.5 billion a year. 8 years ago, it brought in about $3.5 billion a year. But we've taken in all this money and we just continue to spend it. We've got to get to budget reform so that we can make this state an environment that's friendly to entrepreneurs and friendly to our kids and grandkids that we're paying to put through school, who are leaving us to go to Texas and Tennessee and Florida. We've got to have an environment that will, again, back to that mission statement, allow every Louisianan the opportunity to flourish. Now, flourishing also requires that we have opportunity and that we really address poverty and people who are at the lowest rungs of our economic ladder. This is absolutely essential. And one thing that the Pelican Institute has worked on for a number of years, will continue to be a priority this year, is the issue of occupational licensure. Now, occupational licensure, if you've never had to actually deal with it, may seem like a minor nuisance or maybe even a public good for the people of Louisiana. Surely it's protecting public safety and health. Well, the fact of the matter is Louisiana is one of the most onerously licensed states in the country. We require more licenses for low and moderate income professions than any other state in the country and have the 6th highest burden overall. Now, the good news is a couple years ago, the legislature did take some action. They passed a bill carried by Representative Amy Freeman from New Orleans that sets in standard these rules that the licensure boards promulgate that says they have to meet a public health, safety, or welfare obligation. And it, for the first time, allowed individuals to actually challenge those regulations in court when necessary. We have represented several of those individuals, a veterinarian, a dentist, and several others who have been challenging not the license itself necessarily, but the rules that are underneath that license that make it hard for individuals to have those jobs and keep those jobs. Now, we are asking the legislature to take an even further step, and this is something nearly half of the states in the country have done, and we call it universal recognition. What it means is if you are already licensed in another state and in good standing, we're going to fast track your license right here in Louisiana. I'll give a story. This may seem common sense, and yet it's not done right now. I was speaking to a gentleman who is from Louisiana. He lives in Atlanta. He is a plumber by trade and a minister as well during the day. And he's, in fact, a master plumber in Georgia. His family was having some health issues, and he wanted to come home to his family. So he called the plumbers board and said, "I'd like to come home." And they said, "That's great. We need more plumbers here in Louisiana," which we do, by the way. And they said, "You know what? That'll be great. And here's the way it's going to work. You're going to start back as an apprentice. You're going to start over through the process." He said, "Well, but I'm a master plumber. I've got that certification. I'm in good standing. I don't have any complaints against me." And they said, "Well, those are the rules." These are the decisions that these boards and commissions are making, and we have to give those pathways. We need skilled workers in our state. We need people to come back. If our goal, as the governor has stated, is to bring Louisiana kids home, right? "Come home, Louisiana," as I recall, was the theme of his inauguration. This is a way to do that. We've addressed this already in the state for spouses of military members and spouses of first responders. But it's time for everyone to have that opportunity to come, to earn a living, and to really pursue the American dream here. Now, related to this, and related to the budget is an issue of government efficiency and consolidation and better coordination between agencies. We've seen executive orders from the governor now in a couple of areas, and one place that we hope to see even more of this is in our workforce and safety net programs. As you may be following, the United States Congress is pursuing the reauthorization of a program called WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Currently, that bill, the program unbelievably prohibits safety net programs to work in coordination with the workforce programs. Now, what we know about poverty, what we know about safety nets is they're intended to be a temporary solution to help people get back on their feet. But the truth is, in America, as my friend puts it well, we have made poverty survivable, but not escapable. And part of that is because we disincentivize work and family formation in our safety net programs. And because these programs exist in a series of vacuums, not speaking or coordinating with one another. So again, as the governor and the legislature look at opportunities to provide government services better in a way that help people succeed and help people get back to work, help people flourish, we know that work in particular, along with family formation, are two of the things that have the best chance of helping people get out of poverty. And those are the things that tend to be disincentivized within our system. So we're calling on the state, and we'll have more to say about this certainly in the months and years to come. The legislature has already taken, and Representative Freiberg really has been leading this effort to really bring these programs together. The legislative auditor has done a wonderful job providing all of us data about how these programs could work better. And we believe there's opportunity in the coming years to bring these together and really provide opportunity for every Louisianan. So, of course, there'll be much more in the legislative session. I do want to touch on crime because I suspect this will also come up in the questions. Of course, next week, the legislature will come together to discuss a series of solutions to crime. And so we've been working closely with some legislators, talking with, well, anyone who will listen, but certainly the governor's team and others. And here's our broad advice. First, follow the data. If we don't have policies that are based on experience and data, but rather are knee-jerk reactions, we're going to end up in a place that we've been before. Louisiana, our high crime rate is not new. We have been at the top of the list. These are the bad lists. We never get to be top of a good list, but we're going to get there. We've been at high crime rates for decades. And some of the proposals on the table, we'll see what the bills are, we'll see where they end up. We fear will bring us back to the same old ways of doing things. And the reality is, right, if you remember the quote often attributed to Albert Einstein, definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The truth is we know from the data what works, what public safety projects or programs work. And look, we all want safer communities. Every one of us at some point has been touched by crime, almost certainly, whether it's us directly or a friend or family. And our communities are plagued by it if we don't take bold action to really focus on two things. One, better data and transparency in the system so that we can make better and faster decisions. And the second is really focused on outcomes of our reentry programs. 95% plus of people who are going into incarceration are going to come back into our communities. The question is, what awaits them when they get back? Is it no job, no family, no ID, no opportunity, and return to a life of crime? Or is it training, connectivity, engagement with the community, and ready to get back to work and get back into those communities? Those are the questions we face. The state has already done a lot to focus back on reentry. We need more and better outcomes data so we know what's working and what's not. We need more and better transparency to figure out what programs are actually leading to the best outcomes and best opportunity. Finally, I'll mention sentencing. This will be a big topic, certainly of the special session debate and likely the follow-up. I suspect there'll be a lot of discussion on crime in the regular session as well. In Louisiana, we have some of the wildest sentencing laws in America. You have crimes that are very similar that have very different penalties. We have no streamlined system. And while this isn't in the call for the special session, we hope the legislature will really take up streamlining, organizing our sentencing system so that it's fair and transparent to everyone, to the victims and victims' families who deserve to know when offenders are coming out and in what state, to the certainly to law enforcement, to the state, and to the offenders themselves. We hear stories all the time about them knowing their release dates before the law enforcement does. So we've got to do all of that while we're supporting our law enforcement, putting more and better trained law enforcement officers on the street so that we can all work together to create a safer community here in Louisiana. So there's big things to do. They were talking about big transformational changes in the next coming years, and we hope we can provide the intellectual ammunition, the research, the data to back all these up. You can find most of our proposals in our Louisiana Comeback Agenda, which you'll find on pelicanpolicy.org, and we'll be rolling out more in detailed information as bills get introduced and as the legislature does its work. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to present some of our priorities today, and I'd be happy to take and answer any questions. Yes, sir.
Crime. So what percentage of those that are incarcerated have trouble at home, either fathers or parents that are not there?
So the question is, what percentage of individuals who are incarcerated have trouble at home? The single-parent households, or that's the question, right? So I don't know the exact percentage offhand. It's a huge number. And that's why, when we talk about crime, when we talk about public safety, it's not just criminal justice policy. Education, economic policy, the chance to get work, tax reform, all of these things really have almost a bigger impact on crime than just the justice policies themselves. And so the challenge is we try often to solve crime problems just with things like harsher penalties or things that may sound good that the data just does not back up. In fact, when we increase sentences, the data show us that actually that tends to increase recidivism rates rather than reduce them. Recidivism, of course, being the repeat instance of crime. And so, we've got to deal with all levels of our society, and so that's why we spend as much time and energy talking about poverty and social safety net reform to get people back to work as we do on tax reform and lowering tax rates so that we can empower entrepreneurs to create jobs and opportunity for everyone, as well as those policies in public safety. So long answer to a question. I don't know the number off the top of my head. It's a significant number. It's a huge challenge with our society. Yes, sir.
Daniel, how do y'all prioritize? There's so many things that have to do with public policy. You say, and the news right now is education. Now, believe me, everybody's looking at education, and I got 5 questions on it, like they were asking about single families, whatever. But actually, we got coastal erosion, okay? Crime. How y'all prioritize? Which one y'all gonna work in? And do y'all have a committee or a board that you say, okay, we're gonna tackle this and we're gonna tackle that?
Great.
Do y'all have a board to make those decisions?
Yes, sir. So the question is, how does the
What
Pelican...
is y'all priority right now?
One
more question.
Okay.
What is there any red flag you saw right now with transition, education? Is anything between them and the superintendent? Is there any red flag or something making y'all uncomfortable?
Great question. All right, a couple of questions there. One, how do we make our priorities? Two, do we have a board that is involved in making those decisions? What is our #1 priority? And any concerns with the transition recommendations on education? So first question, how do we decide on priorities? It's not a simple answer. We look at the political environment, we look at the policy environment. We're guided by our mission, again, of every individual having the opportunity to flourish. We look at what we think is most likely to make the biggest change, which is somewhat of a subjective discussion. But of course, when you talk about education, that's the fundamental basis of all of it. It's been our #1 priority since the founding of the Pelican Institute in 2008. So So education, that leads me to that. Education is absolutely our number one priority. We care about lots of things, but that is at the top of the list. We do have a board of directors that guides that mission. We also have an incredibly talented team who researches and puts in information together every day that helps us inform what those priorities are. As to the transition report, the proof will be in the pudding is my answer to that. I think, it outlined a lot of really good and important steps that need to be taken. Those ideas now have to be transferred into legislative or executive action, and I believe those recommendations will be the guide, and I think they're a good guide overall. We're very pleased with most of the recommendations. So no big red flag I would throw out there. We need to see what the team's going to do with them. It'll be an exciting couple of years. All right. Yes, sir, then back there.
You mentioned earlier, you were talking about poverty. And I noticed the Landry administration got some attention over the weekend by announcing that they were not going to accept federal money to help families with food over the summer. And they cited the need for self-sufficiency. So I was just trying to figure out, is that a good thing? Because we have a very high poverty rate in Louisiana.
It's a great question, and the question was, we talk about poverty, and of course some news over the weekend that the administration had said no to some federal support for summer EBT program, I believe is what it was. I will tell you I have not dug into the specifics of that policy, but I can comment broadly. Here's some of the challenges we face. You're right, we have an incredibly high poverty rate. The other part of that is we are, in any given year, one of the very most dependent states on federal government money. And as I like to remind people, there's no magic money tree in Washington. Those tax dollars are our tax dollars too, and we should treat them with the same care. In fact, really those dollars are our grandchildren and great-grandchildren's dollars at the rate we're borrowing to pay for all of these. So that's sort of both of those things are a context to the answer. Too many, as I mentioned earlier, of our safety net programs, including the food stamps and public support for EBT, trap people in cycles of poverty. So if you look, and this we could do a whole other day, maybe John will invite me back to talk about benefits cliffs. If you look, go through those, so I'll give you an example of Orleans Parish. A single mom with 3 kids in Orleans Parish, who makes $20,000 in private revenue, her income is going to stack with all the programs to about $80,000. If she makes an additional $5,000, she picks up an extra shift, she gets a gig driving for Uber, she gets a promotion, whatever it may be, she loses about $20,000 of those supports. And so what happens is no person makes that decision for their kids, right? When your job is to provide for your kids, you're not going to make a decision that causes you to lose more money than you gain. And so we trap people in these programs. And the same thing happens as we continue to extend those kinds of benefits over and over and over again. So again, without commenting on that specific decision, just because I haven't looked at the specific policy yet, what all too often we've just said yes and yes and yes to take the money, take the benefits, extend the benefits, and we just see in the workforce participation rates and everything else, those numbers continue to decline. Instead, what we want to try to do with the best mix of policy is to help people when they need it, to provide temporary assistance to help people get back on their feet, and then make sure we don't block those pathways to work and opportunity later to where they get stuck in the system rather than we're helping them out. So those are all very complicated decisions and challenges, and I find, especially with things like this, the headlines don't often tell the full story. So again, I haven't spoken to them about this, but my expectation based on general knowledge is that they felt like those programs would continue that cycle and instead are looking for a better way to provide help to those who need it while not helping trap people in those systems. Thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
Budget reform.
Yes, sir.
The devil is in the details.
Sure is.
One of the biggest obstacles is constitutionally mandated so-called
Yes.
something like that. Everybody rails about them. Nobody does anything about them. Is your organization dedicated to getting rid of them?
Yes, sir. The question was about these constitutional and sometimes statutory dedicated funds that lock up so much spending within our state budget. You're absolutely right. Part of the challenge with budget reform, which means part of the challenge with tax reform, is that when a lawmaker walks in the building for this roughly $50 billion budget that our state now has, a lawmaker only gets to choose about $1 out of every $10 we spend. And so whether that's a federal dollar that has strings attached to it, that when it's accepted, it is what it is, whether that is, again, one of these constitutional statutory dedications. And I want to put this in context for folks who may not know them, right? So first of all, imagine trying to run a small business or a household budget where 9 out of every $10 was already spoken for before you had a chance to make priority decisions. And then add to that, imagine those decisions that lock those in were made by maybe your crazy uncle 50 years ago, right? Think about the things we do differently today, the way we spend money. Technology has changed things very dramatically, and it was true even if we go back 50 years from that. And so the idea that a program is so good and so important that we have to constitutionally protect spending the money, if it's a good and important program, it should stand on its own merits, and as the legislature debates the budget, they should fund those things. So what happens is, as the gentleman rightly notes, we get into a system where we're funding things just because that's the way it's always been done and that's what the rules are. Until we break that cycle, it will be very, very challenging. So we have many times over the years called for the elimination of statutory and constitutional dedications. We've called for more budget review by the legislature. We will be talking this year as well, I didn't mention it in my original remarks, but about some more transparency and accountability for the federal dollars that we accept to make sure what we have found in our research is there are billions of dollars the legislature never even has insight on. They're accepted by administrative decisions and they have strings attached to them, and we're trying to better understand what those are and what the long-term cost to the state is. But part of that is also locking up this budget in a way, right? Just imagine if you take a federal grant that involves hiring a staff person, the grant may pay for the staff and the short-term compensation. It doesn't pay for the long-term pension liability. It doesn't pay for the long-term health care liability. And so we need to make those decisions thoughtfully because those begin to really impact the state budget in a deep and powerful way, and it really ties the hands of the legislature from being able to prioritize. You know, when I vote for my state representative or state senator, one of the most important things I'm asking them to do is represent me in discussing how my tax dollars are spent. And I think most people feel that way as well. So what happens is we've tied the hands of the legislature by putting into the Constitution and in statute all of these things. And what happens inevitably, when there's a good year, nobody worries much about it because we have enough money to go around. And then we spend and we spend and we spend, and we put more dedicated funds in. We start more programs. We have to backfill programs. We saw this in early childhood this year. The federal dollars ran out, as everyone knew they would, and then there was an expectation the state would pick up the tab. Now, again, not commenting on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but those are what happened. We continue to ratchet up, and then in the down years, we don't cut spending. We send an extra bill to the taxpayers and say, just give us more money. And so if we can break that cycle, if we can end or at least significantly reduce the dedicated funds, focus on our dependence on the federal government, and really make wise long-term decisions for the fiscal health of the state, we're going to be in a much better position. Thank you for the question. All right, we got two back there.
I hear a lot of talk by organizations eliminate basically the income tax. But nobody ever says, am I going to drop the budget by that amount? Or am I going to replace it with something else? Nobody, including yourself, presents an itemized methodology to eliminate the income tax. And to be honest, the taxes overall in Louisiana are not that horrible.
Thank you. So the question was, everybody talks about eliminating the income tax, but doesn't tell you how they're going to do it. whether it's by eliminating some spending or raising some tax elsewhere. Sorry, there was a second part to your question.
Really, the overall tax base.
Oh, that's right.
Is really not very, we're not on the bottom.
Thank you. So the other comment was our overall tax liability is not very high. So two things. One, if you go to the Pelican Institute website, you can find a 20-some-odd page report that outlines exactly how we intend to eliminate the personal income tax. I'll give you the top line outlines. It's part of the challenge is it's very complex, as you know. That's part of the problem with our tax code. But I'll give you the top lines now. I'm sorry, I can't see you. It's not your fault. It starts, and this is where there is some reduction in government spending, by getting to a flat tax in year one. By the way, we hired an economic modeling firm to come in run all of these. We ran about 30 different simulations of different ways to get to the tax policy before we landed on where we are. What that does, just in year one, the projections of just getting to a flat tax would add 4,000 new jobs and $1 billion in economic activity in the first year alone. So what we see, and we can model this, is the economic growth that begins to happen that brings not only more people and jobs to the state, but also more tax revenue. But the second thing that happens is we're not calling for major cuts to government, although we would certainly be happy to have those conversations. But what we do recommend is, again, that expenditure limit I mentioned earlier, that we constrain the growth of government to inflation and population. So getting to a flat tax in year one, putting in an actual expenditure limit that will constrain the growth of government, the income tax can be eliminated, we believe, in the next 8 to 10 years is what the model is. Faster if there's faster economic growth, slower if there's less. But that way, it's sort of the old trust but verify. That if revenues don't increase and we don't have a surplus, then the tax rate doesn't come down. You have a follow-up? Yes, sir.
Do you support the 0.5% sales tax?
Not, the question was, do we support the 0.45 sales tax? As a standalone, we would not support the renewal of that tax. That tax, everyone remembers, was intended to give the state 2 years to figure out its budget problems. We didn't. Instead, we just kept spending, and then we renewed it again, right? So we do not support the renewal of the 0.45 as a standalone. If it's part of a broader package, I think that should be on the table. So if we're actually going to roll back or eliminate the personal income tax, address the complexity of the corporate taxes, then we would support that as part of a package. I'll mention too, to your second question originally, is our tax rate, is our tax burden all that high? So if you go back to the end of the Jindal administration, we had the 5th lowest tax burden in the country. The organization that typically would produce that report, the Tax Foundation, stopped producing that report in part because they couldn't agree on the methodology. As we look and try to piece together other reforms, so it's not apples to apples, admittedly, but as we look at it, we're now somewhere in the middle of the pack. So you're right, we're certainly not the highest tax burden, and we're certainly not the lowest tax burden. We're right in the middle of the pack. And our contention has long been, the problem isn't necessarily the tax burden. We would love to see a lower tax burden. We believe the right mix of tax policy and a lower tax burden creates jobs and opportunity and produces the results we want. The real problem is the complexity of the tax code. The corporate tax code alone has 432 pages of tax preferences. We almost spend, I'll put that in quotes, as much in tax preferences as we collect in taxes. So what happens is you get the worst of both worlds. You have a high rate that is a disincentive for companies, for jobs, for people to come here because it looks bad. We don't even make it onto the list because of that. Then you don't actually collect that much revenue from it. So you're not funding essential government services with it. So it's the worst of all worlds when you have complexity. As I often remind crowds, if you give a special tax preference to one person or one group of people here to raise the same amount of money to fund government, you have to increase the rates for everybody else. And so what we want, what good tax policy looks like, is low, flat, broad, and fair, right? We want everyone to have skin in the game. You want it to be as low a rate as possible so that opportunity and jobs can flourish. So that's what we're trying to get to at the end of this is we've got to tackle the complexity, make it as simple as possible, make it as easy to comply with as possible, have fewer individual preferences throughout the code so that everyone is on an equal footing. We tend to believe at the Pelican Institute that government typically doesn't do a very good job of picking winners and losers, and we'd rather them get out of that business and let the market decide that. So lots of work to be done. It's a complex issue. I'd love to talk.
So are you saying you would prefer doing away with the tax breaks that are offered to businesses to come here?
If the rate is lowered along with it. So the question was, are we for eliminating the sort of special preferences in the corporate tax code in particular?
Right now, what would you, I mean, do you like when you see that in every story that, you know, somebody's going to come here, they're going to create four jobs, and they're going to get a $10 million tax
Right.
break?
No, and if you look at our tax proposal, we recommend phasing those out. Some of them are contracts. You can't just eliminate them right away. Phasing those out in favor of a low flat corporate tax rate as well. So our proposal covers both individual and corporate tax codes. Our preference and our recommendation is that you eliminate as many special preferences as possible by getting to a low flat or zero-based tax rate so that you're more competitive with other states. Then you don't need all of those. Look, they're logical. They were created in response to a really punishing and complicated tax code. The problem is the solution made the problem worse. And so if we can get to making the problem better, everyone will be better off. All right, I had one back here. Tom, I think. Thank you. And Tom was mentioning that the bishops also support good data-based reforms, and we're supportive of the package of reforms in 2017, as was the Pelican Institute. And I would agree. I think we've got to be really thoughtful about following the data. The Pelican Institute produced a report last year that what we wanted to do was understand. The criticism was that some of the reforms that focused, again, as Tom mentioned, exclusively on nonviolent offenses, that we wanted to understand, did that have any impact on the crime rate? We were all experienced during the COVID lockdowns and the years following a spike in crime. We felt it, saw it in every community. We want to understand, is there any correlation? We hired an outside data firm to come in and run these numbers with an honest question. Did it make a difference? With the findings were that there was no correlation between the spike in crime and the reforms that were made. It also found that Louisiana's spike in crime matched the spike in crime that were in every state in the country during the lockdowns. Whenever particularly young men are unemployed and roaming the streets, we're going to have problems. We see that throughout history. Secondly, it actually found that Louisiana's spike was just slightly lower than actually the national trends. That doesn't make it better. Let me be very clear about that. We all want lower crime. We all want less recidivism and more public safety. So we've got to understand what the data are telling us. They're not always conclusive, and we've got to keep studying it. But I agree. We've got to have a good, robust conversation about what the right policies should be. All right. One more question. Yes, ma'am.
The governor has asked the public to make comments about whether they agree with CPR, the Coastal Restoration Program, being moved into DNR. Have you all taken a position on that? And how do you feel about, it seems complex, that the questions they are asking and requiring
Thank you. The question was, the governor has proposed moving the coastal CPR, Coastal Protection Restoration Agency, into the Department of Natural Resources and asking for public comment related to that. We have not taken a position yet. We're still studying and looking at that issue. What I can say is what we would encourage is, this is a really important issue to the state, to a lot of us. We care a lot about making sure we can protect our coast and some of our valuable resources there. The question is, how do we best balance good policy across those? How do we make sure we can protect the coast without harming our ability to create and retain good jobs in the state? So, for example, we believe the lawsuits suing the oil and gas companies and have done an economic study of this. They're costing us about $100 million a year in lost wages, and actually reducing the amount of money coming into local government at a faster rate than the oil and gas companies are losing profit. So it's a lose-lose for everybody in the process, except perhaps the lawyers. In this case, what we would want, the benefit of some kind of consolidation is that you have a more comprehensive view of policy-making decisions rather than putting things in different buckets. That said, I agree with you. It's incredibly complex. It's an issue probably most people in the public haven't spent much time thinking about or trying to better understand. Even, again, policy organizations like ours are still studying and trying to make a determination about what's best. I think it's good to have a debate about it one way or the other. I think those are good, healthy public discourse things. And I believe, I'm a strong believer that good, engaging, robust discourse is good for everyone. I love to do debates. I love to engage. We do a lot of speaking engagements because we all get better. Even if we end up not agreeing at the end of it, that's okay. The debate benefits everyone. So I know that's not a direct answer to your question, but I think it's an important issue, and we'll continue to look at it. All right, I'm happy to stick around for a minute, but really grateful for your time. Thank you.